All right. Well, hello, everyone. If we have yet to meet, my name is Joey Zumaya. And to introduce myself and why I am the one facilitating this webinar, give myself a little bit of legitimacy here. I think I have two roles that would be of interest to you that would qualify me as covering how to run an effective board meeting with all of you. First one is I'm the founding partner of the Zumaya Group, who has been working alongside the Intermountain Division, all of the DHQ staff, and wonderful officers and AO leaders throughout the entire division on implementing the standards of excellence. And the second role is on the national board. I am the chair of the Strategic Planning Committee, which is a newly formed committee of the national board that's taking a look at all of the challenges, issues, and opportunities 3 to 5 years out that the Salvation Army should be concerned with and been pursuing opportunities. I think most importantly, though, I have sat and led over 7 boards in my career, both in the private and public sector, many of them Salvation Army boards. And I've seen a lot of boards in the way that they run meetings, for better or for worse. And because of the things that I've learned, including some of the things that I have done that has worked really well in terms of board meeting operations, in addition to what I've seen others do, we've created a framework that we're going to be sharing with you today that walks you through what we feel is the ideal board meeting structure. And so I'm going to introduce the structure to you to start. On one hand, it's not rocket science. It's not going to be anything that's mind-blowing or even a new concept. On the other hand, you would be amazed, or maybe not, on how many boards don't run their meetings in a way that's like this, that is efficient and considerate and impactful. And so we're not looking to run anything complicated by you today, but rather to maybe reinforce some of the milestones of what a great board meeting looks like. And then we'll walk you through each step, give you some more color and tactics as to how you can go about implementing them. We'll leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, and then we will also distribute a recording of this call and this deck to divisional headquarters staff to make sure it is in the library of assets and resources that all of you and your AO leaders will have access to going forward. Before we begin, I want to share some housekeeping things for you to consider. So these are things that you're going to want to take note of right away before we get into the actual framework and curriculum. So that way, when you leave the call, you kind of have a list of things that you're going to want to work through logistically in order to effectively implement the things that we're going to be covering today. The first one that I want to point out is what you don't want to do is take these frameworks and come out swinging on your advisory organization or your advisory organization leaders and say, we're going to start doing these things tomorrow. If you're not operating this way today, and this seems like a framework that's going to be very productive for you, implement it with consideration and with diplomacy. Advisory organizations, especially for those that have been around for a long time, have to go through a change management process in order to implement new procedures and protocols. So before you take everything you learned today and bring it to your AO with passion and with speed, have a conversation with your AO leader. Have them watch this recording, go through the framework together to make sure that there is a mutual plan to bring this to your AO. The second thing that I want to share with you, just to reinforce the importance of getting board meetings right, is the things that I see the most successful advisory organizations get right in their operations is, number one, the quality of the meetings, and number two, the quality of the communication in between meetings. In other words, if as a board, you can really nail or knock out of the park, for lack of better terms, the quality of your meetings and also the quality of communication between your meetings, you're going to have a very successful board. And so those are the type of guidance that I really like to give to people who are trying to implement a board meeting structure that's productive and successful. The last thing is, and this is just some encouragement for all of you, you might find that you're not going to go in a linear fashion of the board meeting structure. In other words, you might want to try through experimentation one of the things that seems like the thing that you want to introduce to the way that you run meetings first with, instead of going from like step 1, 2, 3, you might, hey, let's try this part of this structure first, because that's going to be most productive and most helpful for us. And on that note, we are going to segue over to the actual Zumaya Group board meeting structure. I'm going to introduce it to you from a bird's eye view. And then to reinforce my point of maybe starting with one of these things instead of implementing all of these things at one time, just try to be very mindful and smart about which things you're implementing in what order based on where your AO is at. For instance, if you're starting an AO from scratch, you could start doing these things right away because no one knows any better. However, if you've been operating for 50 years and you're used to a certain structure, you might find that we're going to just get sending a really good pre-read to all of our board members as part of one thing among many that we're going to implement to start from scratch. So let's go through the entire structure, and then we're going to unpack what each one looks like, including some pretty interesting insights that reinforce the importance and the value of doing these things as we go through each one. So, according to us, in our humble opinion, which on this subject is not so humble, this is what the ideal board meeting structure looks like. Step number 1, about a week before your board meeting, you draft an agenda for the meeting. Now, most of you know that you have a standing or rolling agenda. So this should not be too heavy of a lift. However, you are going to be required to collaborate with different people, both internally and externally, staff internally, AO members externally, to get information and to organize it for your board meeting. And that's why you want to start with the agenda draft or drafting the agenda about a week before the actual meeting, because that would help you move on to the second step of the process, which is what we call for content. That is where you are gathering the information from all of your different inputs and your stakeholders to build a really solid agenda, which would move on to the third step in the process, which is finalizing your pre-read. This is where you've gathered the information, you've organized it, and you put it into a format that gives everybody a really good head start to your meeting. Then you send the pre-read. You send a board meeting pre-read, which I argue is the most important thing that you can do in a board meeting, besides one other thing that we're going to be talking about, which is the meeting itself. Then you have a board meeting that everybody's been prepped for, everybody's excited about, everybody's clear on. And then based on what was discussed and decided in that meeting, you delegate responsibilities and you wash, rinse, repeat. Our argument is that this simple yet clear approach to running board meetings is going to be something that if you do it, when you do it, is going to allow you to focus on the most important part of having an AO, which is what we refer to as the 2 R's, which is relationships and results. You don't want to spend time or waste time fumbling over agendas and notes and minutes. That's the housekeeping part. If you're spending the majority of your time on that, you got it all wrong. You should be focused on the relationships that you have with your AO members in your community and the results that you get from your partnership with those individuals. And by the way, I can't speak for everybody that sat on a board, a nonprofit board before, but the reason why I sit on nonprofit boards is to build meaningful relationships and to drive meaningful results. And so if you allow your board members or your AO members to do that, they're going to stick with you longer, and you're going to see a bigger ROI on the amount of engagement and investment that you see from them, because that's why they're there. You're not paying us to be on your AO. right? A lot of us are seasoned executives, so we're not doing it to build our resume. We want to build meaningful relationships and generate meaningful results. And when you implement a structure like this, it allows you to focus on those things. So draft an agenda a week before. After that, you call for content, you finalize your pre-read, you send your pre-read 48 hours in advance. You have a really good meeting focused on the 2Ds, which we will get into in a minute. And then you delegate responsibilities, and then you do it all over again. You do it consistently and you do it well. Let's move on to the first step. So in step one, where you're drafting the agenda, the cool thing about this presentation is that we've collaborated with OnBoard to get some stats from some of the research that they've done from the hundreds of boards who use their software. And we've even done some screenshots about what this would look like in your onboard software to reinforce the point as well. But what we learned in the research that we got from OnBoard was that nearly 60% of administrators distribute materials less than a week in advance of meetings, and about half of them send less than 4 days advance. And that correlates pretty strongly with some of the research that we've done with Salvation Army AOs, even as recently as last week when we did looked at a survey done for the entire territory, is that most officers and AO leaders saying that they don't feel that they're preparing for board meetings as much as they should. And so when we all know, get a head start, when you plan ahead on a meeting or some type of initiative, you're more likely to get value and you're more likely to succeed on that thing that you planned ahead from. There's nothing more frustrating than going to a meeting that you are not prepared for. My favorite t-shirt that I've seen is says, "I just left a meeting that could have been an email." And unfortunately, it's very true for a lot of our board meetings. So we want to get down the discipline or the habit of drafting an agenda that, even though it might be a standing agenda, would be something that initiates the process to identify what are we talking about this month, what are some of the standing issues we need to lean into consistently, and then what are some of the rolling or pending issues that we need to talk about real time. Board members, ideally, when a strong agenda is drafted, have ample time to give input, especially with members of the executive committee. There is time to decide on what should come off or what should stay on to the agenda. But either way, regardless of whether it's the officer, the secretary of the board, or someone who just owns the minutes and the distribution, there should be an agenda that's drafted for each meeting about a week ahead of time. Now, something that's unique to IMD is historically you have used probably a paper copy of an agenda to prep for your board meetings. But because of the really amazing investment that divisional headquarters has made in the onboard software, at some point you could start drafting this agenda in the software, making it really easy and efficient for you to do so. But you have to decide when it's a good time to change. I defer to Michael and team on when you want to revert from what you're doing now, if you're doing something now, to the software itself. The sooner the better, in my opinion. But either way, draft an agenda about a week before the meeting and start to get a process and a dialogue going to get to a place where you're going to graduate to a pre-read, which leads us to step number 2. And this is a step that I refer to called call for content. 40% of boards indicated that communicating in between meetings is an area they need to improve in to increase board effectiveness. If you're in that category, you are not alone. Some encouragement for you, right? This is not a unique challenge to the Salvation Army. But what the call for content step does after the agenda for the meeting has been drafted is it's a forcing function to get everybody who is responsible for providing information or updates for the pre-read that's going to go out in the next step in an effective, efficient, and timely manner. For instance, if you want to report out on the finances of the core or the command for the review and approval of the advisory organization, especially if there is a gap between the amount of money that you have and the amount of money that you need to clarify where there is fundraising capabilities, the person that provides the financial update gets contacted in the call for content process. So Joey's the chair. He says, all right, I want to see the draft of the agenda. And then the minute that draft agenda is approved, usually within the same day or two, then someone who owns this responsibility within the AO is going to go to everyone who provides an update, whether it's from programs and services, whether it's from the facilities or buildings committee, but most commonly it's going to be finance. And you need to provide a opportunity for those people to have time to send you an update in a format that's easy for the board members to read, digest, and understand before the board meeting. One thing that we're going to be providing to and working on with divisional headquarters to all of you is a template that you can use until you get fully up and running on the OnBoard software. It's a PowerPoint template that's going to simplify and consolidate a lot of the updates that you give. But either way, anybody who's responsible for providing an update needs to do so in a timely manner within the call for content process. This improves communication, it improves clarity, but most importantly, it answers the question, which is going to be also included in the next step, which is, do you prepare your board members for the meeting or not? If I'm on your AO, you're either preparing me for the meeting or you are not. And if you really say that you want me to help you raise more funds, make more connections, provide more expertise, there's nothing better than you can do for me. There's no more consideration that you can give to me than prepare me for the board meeting. In fact, speaking for myself, I would rather be on a board that adequately prepared me for the meeting in terms of what to know beforehand, what to read in advance, what kind of discussions I should prepare for, and what kind of decisions that I'm going to make, then I'd rather be on that board than a board that thanked me profusely left and right, but didn't prepare me for meetings. Because I like my time more than I like anything else. So if you could save me time and respect my time, I think you're going to see a really good return on investment for me. So to recap where we're at so far, you've drafted an agenda and you've also started a process that we refer to as call for content, where the person providing finances is asked to send them in advance so we can include it in the pre-read. The person that is going to provide a video for the upcoming Red Kettle event is going to include that so we can send it to the board to watch in advance, right? Like all of these things are being organized and included in a pre-read that's going to go out to the board meeting or to the board members no later than 48 hours in advance. You could do 24 hours, but I highly recommend 48 hours, and I'll tell you why. So let's talk about step number 3. This is the one, if you are only going to start with one, that I urge you to begin with. This is the step that makes or breaks the quality and the effectiveness of a board meeting. A board meeting itself, the quality of board meetings, I argue, make or break the success and the effectiveness of the entire board, right? But the pre-read is what determines the success and the quality of the meeting itself. Now, let's pause here before we get into some of the training aspects, and let's just look at this from a human standpoint. The higher the profile of a board member that you recruit, The more connected they are, the more high profile they are. Um, Usually, the more wealthy they are, the more connected they are, the busier they are. And if you're like me and you start your day at 5 a.m. and you end your day at 5 p.m. and there's just a hurricane of people and meetings and stuff in between, you greatly appreciate being told in advance what is going to be covered in the meeting that you're about to attend and given adequate time to read through those things and to debate them or to give an opportunity for clarifying questions. And that is exactly what a pre-read does. I know as officers and staff, we're really pressed for time and we don't have enough of it. And I would say the same, if not more, applies to your AO members. So by getting the pre-read process right, you're going to be winning half the battle, I would say. And it's surprising to me that I take it for granted that at LinkedIn, we have this as a standard executive practice for our meetings. Every executive business meeting has a pre-read. It has links. It has stuff that you can go through because we really value our time, our meeting time as collaborative time, not fumbling over updates or reading through decks. So out there in the wild, it surprised me to see how many boards weren't doing this pre-read process, but it really is valuable. So what you're going to do here is the end game is for you to organize an agenda and a pre-read in OnBoard and then send it out to all of your board members 48 hours in advance. That's the end game. That's going to be a game changer for you because it's going to do two things. One, it's going to get everybody in the habit of using OnBoard, and you're going to see that adoption, and you're going to help your AO go through that change management and see the value of using OnBoard. But the second thing that it's going to do is it's going to make sure that a lot of the things that you're probably frustrated by fumbling over or getting off to a slow start is going to be eliminated, or you're going to mitigate that risk because you're sending a really good pre-read. So that's the end game, is to send a pre-read for every meeting in OnBoard 48 hours in advance. However, I'm aware that you might not be exactly ready for that this month or next month. So maybe you want to start this process beforehand. What I would urge you to do if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed or you're not sure exactly where you should start, there is no reason why you can't use OnBoard next month or the month after. I'm not saying that. But if you're just trying to introduce the idea to your board and get some energy and enthusiasm around this, start with an email. Say, hey, Mike, I know that we have our board meeting this Friday. I look forward to seeing you. I hope your son won that soccer game. I'm sending you this email to show you the agenda for our meeting, show you which things that you should watch or read in advance, and to also show you what motions and decisions we're going to be calling for so that you have a chance to look at them. And if you do that, if you're not already doing that and you do it for the first time, I guarantee you that the amount of energy and respect that you're going to get in response from your board is going to be very telling. So there should be a pre-read, whether you're starting out with a simple email and some attachments, or you're already going forward with the end game of doing it in your OnBoard software that goes out to your board members, your AO members, 48 hours, worst case, 24 hours in advance. And it says, hey, everyone, look forward to seeing you in our meeting on Friday. Here is the agenda. Here are the materials, including the financials. And here are the motions that we're going to be calling. Feel free to contact me with any questions. I look forward to seeing you then. And by the way, the amount of energy that people have when they start the board meeting is higher when you give them a pre-read. I'm not sure about you, but I've gone to some board meetings where people are kind of like coming in grumpy because it's the end of the week and they don't know why they're there. They don't know what they're talking about. And I've also been in situations where a pre-read has been sent out. You know, you're always going to have the scenario where 8 out of the 10 people read them. Not everybody does. nor will everybody do that one day. It's kind of a reality of serving on boards. But you come in here and everybody's on the same page. Everybody's walking to the same beat in the same direction, and it's a beautiful feeling. So a pre-read should go out. It should include the agenda. It should include the materials. It should include any emotions that you know of beforehand. And that way, when you open up the meeting, it's a lot more productive. And I'm going to cover that in the following steps. There's also going to be a lot of other things that I add as recommendations at the end of this training that are not in the deck. So bear with me. But let's move forward to step number 4. You send the pre-read and you make sure that in any scenario, even if the pre-read is imperfect, you still send one. The way that I would reinforce this is the pre-read for a board meeting is so valuable that you would want to send a decent one, even if it's incomplete, than not sending one because it wasn't perfect. That's how valuable and impactful sending a pre-read is. There's a couple of quotes that I love that apply to this. The first quote is, "Do not let perfection be the enemy of progress." Right? So for those of you who are perfectionists out there, if you're going to, instead of spending the next 3 months writing the perfect pre-read format, send an incomplete, ugly version and then get better the month after. The second quote that I love is, "A decent plan executed violently today will always outperform the perfect plan launched tomorrow." It's kind of the same point. These are things that you get better at over time. I think what you'll see is if you send a board meeting pre-read for the first time, you're going to see them go, "Oh, that was good. That was helpful." And then you could solicit feedback. What else should we include? What would save us more time in the next board meeting? Does anybody else have any examples from other boards that they sat on about a good pre-read that they sent? So my main point that I keep reinforcing over and over here is send a pre-read. And get better at it over time versus feeling like you have to have the perfect one sent the first time. When I build dashboards for different boards that I'm on, or even here at LinkedIn, and I'm trying to think about a metric that I should use to measure success of a team or an initiative, the guidance that I give the people that are building the dashboard is, if I have the options to choose from one of 2 metrics, the first one being the perfect metric that's hard to organize or hard to get versus a decent metric that's easy to track, I always go with the easy to track metric because we're busy and it takes a lot of time. And the less time something takes and the more we could swim downstream, the better. So I think I'm done belaboring the point and beating a dead horse around the fact that you should send a pre-read. You should start sending them now and get better at it over time, because you will materially notice the impact that it has on the success and the effectiveness of the board meeting. So let's recap. You have drafted an agenda, which should be 80% complete every month because you have a standing agenda that you use. You go through a call for content process. You're emailing the people, or they have it in their calendar to automatically submit, the person who's organizing the pre-read, their material in a format that's easy to copy and paste and easy to put together, ideally in OnBoard. Then you have finalized the pre-read. You built the pre-read. Everybody, hey, we're good to go. 48 hours, 24 at the very worst, you send the pre-read. And now we actually move on to step 5, which is the meeting. So a really good board meeting can make the difference of an introduction that you want and whether you get it or not, funds that you want to raise and whether you raise them or not. It could just make the difference between so many things. Most importantly, the culture and the effectiveness of your board. And by the way, just like every company, just like every team, every board has a culture. Every board has a culture. And when your board members are in the community talking about the culture of your board and whether they like it or not, or whether their heavy hitter friends should join or not, they're going to talk about your meeting. They're going to talk about how good or bad your meetings are. And that's why when you get the meeting right and the meeting and the communication between meetings right, that's something that is going to have your board members speaking about the fact that you have a good culture. And so for the Zumaya Group, we have tried to simplify how board meetings should work by anchoring on a framework that we refer to as the 2Ds. So the first D stands, by the way, the 2Ds means that these are the two primary things that you should be focused on doing in every single AO meeting. The first D stands for discussion, and the second one stands for decision. If you have adequately organized a pre-read and sent it with enough time for board members to synthesize, digest, and prepare for the meeting, then in most cases, you should have more than ample time, even if your board meeting is monthly and for an hour, to use the majority of that time for discussions or for decisions. Now, you might be asking me, okay, Joey, I got you. I'm following along so far. I send the pre-read. I've showed them a bunch of information we're going to be talking about. Now I have this awkward, slow start, and I've already showed them everything I have. How do I start my meeting? Right? And that's a common response that we get when we talk about the 2D framework. So what I urge every single person who is running the board meeting that has sent a really great pre-read to do to start the meeting is to have the opening remarks that sound like this. All right, everyone. Welcome to the meeting. Thank you for being here. The first thing that we're going to do in this meeting is to pause and to confirm if anybody has read the pre-read and if they have questions on anything that we're going to be talking about today. I love that opening remark because it's kind of a great equalizer. It shows you who has and has not read the pre-read. And by the way, we want to have a healthy culture where we executives could say, I didn't read it. I was too busy. What is the Reader's Digest or the executive summary of the pre-read? And then that's where you could say, okay, now we're going to recap. The goal of today's meeting is to make sure that we drive enough attendance to the fundraiser that we have in a month because it's going to make or break our ability to fund this program that we have. We're still going to talk about other things and highlights and all of those things, but we really want to go around the table today and ask each board member if they can introduce one more sponsor for this event, or if they have one more corporate connection for this event. And when you get the agenda out of the way, when you get by sending a pre-read and there is no outstanding questions, then you spend less time on the housekeeping and logistics and you spend more time on discussions and decisions. I've been in enough Salvation Army AO meetings to know that we need more time to sell more fundraising event tickets. We need more time to find more people to participate in our capital campaign. We need more time to debate whether what we should do with this facility or not. There's never enough time. And the board meeting should be the time where we spend discussing and deciding those things. So practically speaking, I'm a big fan of trying to turn my board meetings into what I refer to as working sessions, especially if you have a roll up your sleeves blue collar board of more doers than executives or business professionals. But either way, you should be discussing a need, taking action on a need. Even in a pre-read where you say, hey, everyone, we have 70% of our tickets sold for this event. We need every board member to sell 2 more tickets. And we're going to go around the horn and say, hey, everyone, do you think that you can sell 2 more tickets or find 2 more sponsors? And people feel like you're putting them in the game. People feel utilized. And there's some people that are going to huff and puff, of course, right? But for the most part, when you use the 2D frameworks and only focus your the goals of your meeting on either discussions or decisions, then I think, again, the ROI that you're going to see as a result is going to be a lot higher. Meetings should be efficient, productive, and focused. And by the way, that doesn't mean that you don't exchange pleasantries or celebrate people's birthday. In fact, you get to do that because you didn't fumble over the agenda. So again, relationships and results, discussions and decisions. Those are the two acronyms that we often urge people to come back to in the board meeting. And again, when you're in the process of introducing this framework and this approach and these concepts to your board members, what I always like to say to them is, hey chairperson, I'd really love to implement this new framework, and I think we're going to start having a really good, well-oiled board meeting in about 3 meetings from now. We might fumble over the first one, the second one will be decent, the third one we're going to be a well-oiled machine. So provide some grace and a little bit of a ramp to get from where you're at to where you want to be. There's always a lot of stuff going on, and try to be mindful about the right order to go in. But again, the board meeting should be energizing, efficient, productive, and focused. And the more that you utilize OnBoard and its capability, the easier it will be for you to run a good board meeting, including the agenda and the pre-read. Lastly, step number 6, before I have some pro tips and some closing remarks, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Step number 6 is the delegation of responsibilities. There should be a clear delegation or assignment of action items to respective board members, and they should be tracked and completed, and they should be, most importantly, agreed to and aligned with the person that you're delegating them to. So for instance, one thing that I love to do at the end of my board meetings is say, okay, everybody, let's bring it home. I have 3 things that we're all committing to. Mike, I have you running with selling 2 more tickets. Mariana, I have you signed up for editing the video so that we could send it out to our Facebook page on Thursday. And Joey, I have you as making that introduction to LinkedIn for the sponsorship, so that we could see if we could bridge the delta between our budget for the event and what we've actually raised. Anybody have any questions on that? Does that sound good? And then the secretary or whoever's responsible for delegating the those responsibilities and documentation does that either in OnBoard or through some other administrative function. To recap, and some closing remarks and some pro tips. This is what we feel is a simple, implementable, and valuable framework for running board meetings. You might do it a little bit differently. You might even do it a little bit more structured, but for the most part, these 6 steps are things that keep your board moving forward and that you could really master over time. The second thing is, if you want a healthy, thriving, impactful board, get your meetings right and get the communication in between meetings right, including the personal touches and the relationship building and the frequency of and cadence of your communications. And lastly, if you only start with one thing out of everything that we covered today that's going to have the biggest impact on the quality of your board meetings, it's sending a pre-read. Even if you start with a bulleted list and some attachments in an email, and you have some fun doing it in the process. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to open it up to Q&A. But one last thing that I will share, and you might not be able to flip a switch and do it this month or next month, but it's something that I would argue, like the pre-read for the meeting, is going to have the biggest impact on whether your board members take you seriously or not. And that is the following: start your meeting on time and end your meeting on time. No exceptions, no deviation. And because you're sending a strong pre-read, people will have an opportunity to learn or know what they've missed, and you could always catch them up. But if you notice a theme of what I'm anchoring for in all of this training and all of these frameworks, it's not productivity, It's not results. It's time. It's time. People have less time than they've ever had before. We're competing for board members in what I refer to as the attention economy, and it's not getting any easier. So when you do these things, you solve for time. And that's it. I want to open it up for Q&A. The team has been monitoring the chat, and I don't think we have any questions that are pending as of right now. But I would love to take any questions about anything that we covered, or just like any other topics about board meeting management in general. The floor is open.
Well, let me jump in here with a couple of thoughts and questions, just for clarification for those with the Salvation Army that are listening in. The agendas and the preparation of pre-read materials, sending that all out in advance, all of that can be done in OnBoard, as Joey mentioned, and that typically will be the task of one or more of each of your AO administrators in communication with your AO leaders. So every month, every quarter, however often it is that you're doing your meeting, the administrator and the leader will want to put their heads together and say, okay, so let's start building our agenda. Let's figure out how we're going to do the pre-read. But all of our administrators have either been trained or have the training available to be able to create those materials. I want to thank Joey and Mariana and Natalia for actually integrating OnBoard and its processes and functions into the preparation. I'll also mention that this particular presentation and prior presentations of the Zumaya Group for board development will, if they're not already, but will soon be up on our OnBoard platform under resources. And then lastly, just to throw something out as someone who also has been a board member for many boards and for a long time for the Salvation Army, the preparation, love the comments, Joey, on preparation, because part of the preparation, I think, is thinking about how you're going to get your board members at the meeting to really provide analysis, thinking, and recommendations, mining their contacts, networks. So it's not merely a recitation of reports and conveying information, absorbing information, eating lunch, going home. And the preparation is really useful to think about 1, 2, or 3 issues that you're going to really want your board members to be thinking about in advance of the meeting, so that they can bring value and they themselves believe they're adding value. So that'd be just a comment that sort of piggybacks on the value of preparation for meetings.
Great point, Michael. Yeah, board members in most cases, from my experience, are there to be utilized. So let's utilize them by prepping them and putting them in the game. Hello, John. I think that you have a question if you'd like to go next.
Yeah, obviously you've mentioned pre-read a couple times, but you've also mentioned the idea of a standing agenda. I mean, there's not a ginormous amount of variety from month to month. There is some, but I'm wondering if, because we have this standing agenda, does it really reduce the amount of pre-read that's actually happening? Because the board is just like, oh yeah, no, it's those 4 things, no big deal. I'll see you on Wednesday. So I'm just trying to think how to re-engage, re-energize, get them a little bit more excited around a standing agenda.
Yeah. And thank you for the question, John. One thought that you sparked, and then I'll answer your question, is I think that there's this perception that a pre-read and an agenda has to be long. I don't know about you, but I hate long emails and long agendas. So the shorter and more concise, the better, right? So if you have a concise pre-read, in fact, one of the pro tips that we train boards on how to do is when you send out your pre-read, in the subject title, if it's an email, put this is going to be a 10-minute read. And then you're going to be more likely to get people who like, oh, 10 minutes, I'm opening it, right? To answer your question is, depending on the amount of things that you discuss or decide in a board meeting, that can dictate how long or how comprehensive the pre-read or the agenda is. But assuming it's a traditional Salvation Army AO cadence of every month for an hour or an hour and a half, one format that I've seen be easy for staff officers and AO leaders to use is, depending on how many committees you have, you might have a header that says programs and services or facilities, finance, whatever, and just write a simple paragraph or headline about where things are at so that the board members feel informed. You don't need to write a book or a documentary on any of those things, but I've often seen, especially, let me bring this back up here just to kind of reinforce the point. If you go back to the agenda slide here, there in OnBoard, in the interface, you can see that there is the opportunity for you to attach a document or even write a short paragraph of something that's going to be included in the agenda. So for instance, and as an example, one of the cores that we work with here in Southern California just simply tells their board, we fed over 210 people at the food pantry last month. And year to date, we fed 687 people. Please use this information when you're talking about where the food donations can come from, or if you're talking with a potential donor. So again, stats that are easy to organize, easy to get are better. You don't want to have to give yourself a list or chore of 10 things to do. At bare minimum, I would have maybe 5 things that you want the board members to know every meeting. Provide an accrual of like monthly impacts and then like maybe like the year-to-date impacts. And, you know, from my experience, if they have questions, they'll ask you. And if you need to do more research, you can, but that would be my recommendation.
So the pre-read can be as simple as just putting a paragraph underneath each agenda item.
Totally. In fact, the easier, the better. It really maps back to 2 things. If you want your board members to advocate for the Salvation Army in the community, making sure they're informed, and that's where the statistics come in. But more importantly, if there are things that you want the board members to do, make it easier for them to do it. I'll give you an example. When there's a lot of boards that I'm on where they want to tap into my network and get an introduction, or to have me advocate for the organization I'm on the board of. The boards that send me an email saying, hey, here's the LinkedIn profile of the person that we want you to contact. We wrote you an email, and here are 3 things that we think we can mention. I'm going to do that. Versus the ones that say, hey, can you introduce me to Vince? I'm not going to do that. It's going to take me 3 times the amount of time. So in a board meeting pre-read, if you want them to sell more tickets to the event, if you want them to find a referral to participate in the capital campaign, or even if you want them to pay their dues, just include that in the pre-read so that way people can go, oh yeah, that's right, I need to take care of that after all. So inform and calls to action are 2 things that you can build in addition to maybe like some paragraph write-ups of what's going on with programs, services, etc. Awesome. Hi, Christina.
Hi, I have a quick question, and I might have
Sure.
missed it already. So when you're talking about going through updates and making that more efficient, I think we get hung up on that where we give an update that, was a month ago or whatever it was, and everybody already knows it went well, but then we still go through it, like going through the motions. So I just want to know how to be more efficient with our updates.
Yeah, great question. Christina, can you confirm what kind of advisory organization you have? Is it a board, council, women's auxiliary?
So I serve at Service Extension, and
Oh,
so
cool.
we have right now it's a committee. We're trying to be a board
Yeah. And is it how many members do you have?
for
4. Awesome. Well, congrats. That's a great start. Um, and how would you describe how often do you meet?
monthly.
Monthly. And how would you describe the current board meetings? Is it just more providing updates and you feel like you're forcing a conversation, or is it a pretty collaborative conversational meeting, or a little bit of both?
No, I think everybody collaborates and participates, but I feel like sometimes it's a little bit overkill. And again, we're going over something that everybody already knows. We had our Strawberry Day parade, and we walked in the parade, and it was really successful. And but we're still doing that. And so, how do we make it, I guess, not so redundant and
Sure.
get to the meat of the matters
Yep.
that are really, really important?
Yep. Okay. Thank you. I didn't want to speak prematurely without knowing the vibe of the meeting. I have 2 comments. And thank you for the work you're doing, by the way. That's awesome to hear that you have a board that's growing, a council that's growing. The first one is operating off of what I call lead measures instead of lag measures, and I'll explain what I mean. Unfortunately, too many boards in the things that they discuss are looking behind after something has happened and after it's too late to do anything about it, right? We had this event. We made this impact. We did this thing. And to your point, it feels redundant, if not unnecessary. It's like, who wants to talk about the past all the time, right? The highest flying boards operate off of what we call lead measures, where we're talking and planning for things that will happen in the future. So they're planning for an event. They are organizing to progress an initiative. And so if your agenda is always looking forward to the things that you want and need, so if you want them to sign up for an event, if you want them to raise more volunteers, whatever it is, you could have a healthy mix of talking about the past and the future, but the more that you can spend talking about the future, the better. So graduate from looking behind and talking about reports, and then really make an emphasis on looking ahead. So do we need more volunteers for this event? Do we need more donations? Do we need A, B, C, and D? Which leads me to my second comment, which I love board meetings that are like working sessions. So an hour goes by like that. If you send a pre-read that like, hey, here's what we did. If you have any questions, let me know, but here's what we're here to do. And you have a discussion about how you can recruit a new member or to your board, or how you can get more volunteers, or maybe getting more connections. I think when you have a good mix of giving people an opportunity to open up their laptops or to write down a referral, like right there on the spot, it's good because unfortunately, too many AOs, what they do is they share what they want in a board meeting, and then they delegate that responsibility after. Whereas, hey, if you don't have much to talk about, let's do that right now. And then making sure that you have an agenda that reflects that. Remember that if you go to your council like, hey, I learned a new structure, we're going to have some fun fumbling over it for a few meetings, but this is kind of what we're working backwards from. And I want everybody's feedback in 2 or 3, 4 meetings from now. We're going to have a productive meeting where everybody can contribute and feel like they're utilized. I think everybody's always going to be supportive of that. So those would be my comments. Does that help? Great. Awesome. Good luck with everything. I think we have time for one more question. Or comment, by the way, if any of you are doing things that are working really well for you in your meetings and you want to share with your peers. All right. Well, some closing thoughts and next steps. Have a growth mindset, right? Have some fun and experiment with this. You'll be good at it in 2, 3, 4 meetings or in a couple months from now. This took us a long time to learn and master, so it'll be the same for you. The second thing is, like we mentioned before, this recording and this deck will be distributed from divisional headquarters and available to you. but also I would remind you, and I'll ask my team to put the email address in the chat. You can email our team for support at any time if you want, if you have additional questions about what this framework is or how you would apply it. Email help@zumayagroup.org and tell us what kind of situation you're facing, and we're happy to get back to you directly, individually, and or even set up one-on-one time as needed. So with that, thank you everybody for your time today, and it was really good to be with you. Talk to you soon.